Hey everybody. Sorry, I'm at the school. I started doing some of my sonas so I don't leave them all to the last minute. And now I've been up at campus with nothing to do for 2 hours before my lab. So I guess I'm going to do it now so that I don't have to do it super late tonight. So without further ado, let's get started. I think we only have a little bit left to go of group performance problems and solutions. Yeah. And then all we have left is conflict. That's the last section. And I don't think it's very long. It's just this third one was pretty hefty. Okay, so the next section that we're going to go over, we just finished doing communicating information and utilizing expertise. We had done groupthink before that, group polarization, brainstorming, and losses and gains in groups. Now we're going to talk about goals and plans in groups. Okay, so it says, you've probably worked in many groups for which the goal was simply to do your best. Despite the popularity of such goals, the research clearly shows that they are not as effective as specific goals. As Edwin Locke and Gary Latham in 2002 concluded from their review of 35 years worth of studies, quote, when people are asked to do their best, they do not do so. People are indeed capable of better than their vaguely defined best. Groups, like individuals, tend to perform better on a task when they have specific, challenging, and reachable goals, particularly if the group members are committed to the goals and believe they have the ability to achieve them. In addition to having challenging and specific goals, groups are most likely to benefit when there are incentives in place for achieving goals. Okay, so I think that last sentence is pretty critical. I have my pen because I forgot my highlighter, so I'm going to mark it so that I can highlight it later. And I think And the one before it, groups like individuals tend to perform better on a task when they have specific, challenging, and reachable goals. That whole sentence, I think those two are pretty critical. Okay, so one benefit of groups over individuals is that group members can hold each other accountable and encourage each other to keep trying to achieve a goal. Yeah, I think that one's a highlight one right there. A recent meta-analysis of 59 different studies supports this point in the context of physical fitness and exercise. For example, Andrew Prestwich and others in 2012 recruited a sample of British individuals who were interested in participating in a study on increasing their physical activity. Some of the participants were instructed to set specific plans for how to achieve their goal of increasing their physical activity, including how they would respond in particular situations. Oh, well, if I'm in situation X, then we will do Y. And some were not asked to make these plans. In addition, some of the participants worked alone and others worked with a partner. In a follow-up 6 months later, results indicated the participants who both had these plans and worked with a partner significantly increased their physical activity and lost significantly more weight than if they had no specific plans, or if they had these plans but did not have a partner. If a group, I think that last sentence is probably going to be key, especially if you're making note of studies. So I would make a little note of the study, but specifically that last sentence is pretty critical. So if a group doesn't make a good, specific plan, it can fail to utilize the expertise that various group members have. In an experiment by Anita Williams-Woolley and others in 2008, some 4-person groups had 2 members who were particularly expert at some of the skills needed to solve a complete task, and other groups included no experts. If the groups weren't instructed to make a specific plan of how to proceed before they began working on the task, the groups with experts did not do better than the group without. In fact, the group with experts did a bit worse. Without the specific planning, the individual's expertise was not used properly. The other groups were required to discuss before working on the task who would be responsible for which type of evidence and plan how they would integrate the various types of evidence they were given. Only the groups that both had experts and went through this planning did well on the task. I think I'm also going to make a note of that. And that specific last sentence is probably the most critical of that study. So, making a specific plan can also help groups avoid biased sampling. That is the problem we discussed earlier of groups focusing too much on their discussions on commonly held information and not discussing and considering other information that only one or few of the group members have. So, Lucas Thurmer and others in 2015 found that information sharing and group decisions were much better when group members had to make a plan of when and how they would review alternatives before settling on their ultimate decision. Yeah, I think I'm going to make a note of that first sentence. I don't know if we need that last study. I'm going to sit on the fence on that one. Okay, so we went through goals and plans. Now we're going to go through training and technology. We've discussed a variety of factors that can enhance group processes. Table 8.2 presents a set of the conditions that Ruth Wageman and colleagues in 2009 suggest are best for team effectiveness. These suggestions are consistent with the principles that we have addressed throughout this chapter, and they help illustrate the tremendous value that understanding the social psychology of groups can have on the business world or wherever group performance is essential. Social psychologists often are hired to train business students and professionals and a variety of organizations to use these kinds of principles. I don't think we need to highlight anything yet. Let's move on. Anne-Laure Sellier and others in 2019, for example, had business students read information about a fictitious case that was modeled on the real-world decision to launch the Space Shuttle Challenger. The case often demonstrates many of the biases we have discussed in this chapter and elsewhere in this book, such as the tendency to seek confirmation of one's initial beliefs about the case rather than to seriously consider alternatives. I think I'm going to highlight that. That sounds pretty important. Some of these students first received training designed to help decision makers avoid these biases. Sellier and her colleagues found that the students who experienced this training were 29% less likely to make the hypothesis confirming wrong decision about launching than those that were untrained. Some of the obstacles that get in the way of good group discussion and decision-making can be reduced through the use of interactive computer programs, often referred to as group support systems. Key term highlight. It's also known as group decision support systems. It's defined as specialized interactive computer programs that are used to guide group meetings, collaborative work, and decision-making processes. These programs help remove communication barriers and provide structure and incentives for group discussions and decisions. Using this technology, groups can be provided with a systematic agenda of information. With a systematic agenda of information gathering and decision making. Group members can raise concerns anonymously and thus reduce their fear of being attacked for their ideas. Okay, so that's pretty cool that they use a computer program essentially to minimize this groupthink issue. Compared to groups that use more conventional face-to-face modes, of discussion, groups that use these systems often do a better job of sampling information, of communicating, avoiding groupthink, and arriving at good decisions. Training and technology play key roles in the success of groups, teams, and organizations that are dispersed geographically. Recent estimates indicate you know what? I'm going to highlight that first sentence. That sounds pretty important. Recent estimates indicate that a majority of professional workers today spend time working in virtual or dispersed teams. Yeah, teams in which members work interdependently across space and time. Due to globalization and a variety of related factors, COVID, virtual teams can be increasingly important in businesses and organizations. In order for these groups to overcome the barriers associated with being spread apart, sometimes across very different cultures, training and technology to facilitate communication, transactive memory systems, and personal accountability are especially important. I think I'm going to highlight that last bit of that sentence as well. Training and technology. Yeah, that last sentence. Okay, so now we're going to talk about culture and diversity, and this is the last part of section 3. Oh, shoot, no, it's not. We'll get to that in a minute, but we'll do culture and diversity first. So one outgrowth of the surging use of groups dispersed around the world is the creation of greater diversity among members of the groups. Even face-to-face groups, of course, are becoming increasingly diverse, most obviously in terms of gender, race, ethnicity, and cultural background. So how does diversity affect group performance? How can a group best use diversity to its advantage? The answers to such questions and even the meaning of diversity are likely to change as society changes in terms of its demographics and attitudes. In addition, diversity is not restricted to demographic differences among group members, but can also mean differences in attitudes or personalities, skill levels, and so on. Thus, the issues surrounding diversity are particularly complex. I'm going to highlight that last sentence. The evidence from empirical research concerning the effects of diversity on group performance is decidedly mixed. That's essentially saying the same thing. On the one hand, diversity often is associated with negative group dynamics. Miscommunications and misunderstandings are more likely to arise among heterogeneous group members, causing frustration and resentment and damaging group performance by weakening coordination, morale, and commitment to the group. Cliques and conflicts often form in diverse groups, causing some group members to feel alienated. But on the other hand, research has also demonstrated positive effects of diversity, such as on creativity and on the complexity of group discussion. Diverse groups can draw from a greater pool of information, perspectives, and skills than less diverse groups. As more organizations try to attract customers and investors from diverse cultures, diversity in personnel should offer more and more advantages. Cedric Herring in 2009 and 2017 analyzed data from over 1,000 work establishments in the United States and found that racial and gender diversity was associated with greater profits and market share. On the other hand, Andrea Garnero and others in 2014 found that whether diversity predicted greater profits varied depending on what types of diversity, age versus gender, that kind of thing. And industries were studied. Oh, it depended on what types of diversity in industries were studied. Gotcha. Those parentheses in the middle of sentences, man. Okay, so Um, dang. I think still it being decidedly mixed from that very first sentence is probably the only thing that you have to highlight from this section. Maybe the studies. I don't think so though. I don't know. I both think they're going to be on the quizzes and don't think they're going to be on the quizzes. Anyway, I'm going to sit on the fence on that one for a minute. Okay, so focus. Although the overall picture remains mixed, more promising I see what they're trying to do. Sorry. So although the overall picture remains mixed, more promising is research focused on understanding specific factors that can help groups achieve the benefits of diversity while avoiding or reducing its problems. One set of findings is that multicultural groups perform better if their members or leaders have relatively high awareness of their own and other cultural assumptions, what is sometimes called cultural metacognition. I'm going to highlight that key term and its definition. That sounds pretty critical. Cultural metacognition, high awareness of their own and others' cultural assumptions. Okay, so people exhibit cultural metacognition to the extent that they often think about and check the accuracy of their cultural knowledge, particularly in cross-cultural interactions. Having experience internationally may be beneficial here. Carmit, Tadmore, and others in 2012 and 2018 found that students and professionals who had experienced diversity by living abroad were more creative in tasks and more successful in their careers when they identified with both their home and abroad cultures. Having close intercultural relationships or romantic relationships is also associated with working with greater workplace creativity and innovation. Interesting. Data guy from overseas. It'll broaden your perspective. Okay. Research continues to demonstrate other factors that help a group harness the benefits and avoid the problems associated with diversity. These include having group members and leaders who have a positive attitude toward learning new information and experiences, who are emotionally intelligent, and who are culturally intelligent. Training and interventions that improve group members' emotional intelligence or that encourage them to take each other's perspectives can also be effective. In addition, the subgroups that form within the group should not themselves be homogeneous. Rather, they should cut across various racial, gender, and other categories. I think I'm going to highlight that too. I think subgroups being diverse should be highlighted. Training and interventions to improve emotional intelligence or consideration of others' perspectives. I think those are the two most critical things to get out of that thing. Yeah. Okay. So it's just like 2 paragraphs for the last part of 8.3, and it's called collective intelligence. Are some groups smarter than others? We have seen throughout this chapter that groups consisting of very intelligent people, or even people who are expert at a task, very relevant to what the group is working on, are far from immune to making really dumb decisions or falling short of their potential. But are some groups, as a collective working together, particularly smart and effective at, group stuff? Anita Williams Woolley and others in 2010 tried to answer this kind of question. They had 699 people work in small groups in a wide variety of group tasks. Across these various group tasks, some groups did tend to outperform the others. The researchers considered that these groups that tended to do well on a wide variety of group tasks as being high in what they call collective intelligence. That's a key term I would highlight, memorize. That is the general ability of a group to perform well across a wide range of different tasks. So what predicts which groups have strong collective intelligence? Although some research suggests that the intelligence of individual members is a strong predictor of the group's collective intelligence, Woolley and her colleagues in 2019 and 2015 believed that the following factors are much more important. So there's three of them. One, having group members who tend to be strong in social perceptiveness, i.e. they can judge and are sensitive to each other's emotions. Highlight. Two, allowing the various group members to take turns participating in the discussion rather than only having one or a few people dominate. They divide it equally amongst their group. They're egalitarian with the time, with the discussion time. And three, having a higher proportion of women, particularly because they tend to be higher in social perceptiveness than men. Well, that's really gender specific, but they tend to do better with collective intelligence. Okay. I wonder if that's more a product of gender specificity, genes, or if it's a product of conditioning. You're socially conditioned to be more considerate of others because you are specifically male or female, whatever. That'd be a good question to ask a researcher, or as a researcher to ask. Anyway, okay, so now we're on section 4, conflict, cooperation, and competition within and between groups. I think there's only a little bit left. Yeah, it's only got 3 sections. There's mixed motives and social dilemmas, which is the largest section. Negotiation, which is only a page, and culture and negotiation, which is the last couple of pages. So let's get this done. Yeah, let's do this. All right. So conflict. Many of the most crucial issues in the world today involve conflicts between groups or between individuals and their groups. The desire of some individuals to consume valuable resources conflicts with the need to protect the environment for the greater good. A nation's claim to important territory or the right to nuclear arms conflicts with another nation's national security. In this section, we describe some of the dilemmas groups often must confront and what factors influence whether individuals and groups act cooperatively or competitively in dealing with them. We also look at an important mechanism for resolving group conflicts, which is negotiation. Okay, so mixed motives and social dilemmas is the first section. Imagine you have to choose between cooperating with others in your group versus pursuing your own self-interests, which can hurt the others. Examples of these mixed motive situations are everywhere. An actor in a play may be motivated to try to steal a scene, or a basketball player may be inclined to hog the ball. An executive may want to keep more of the company's profits. A family member may want to eat all the leftover birthday cake. And a citizen of Earth may want to use more than a fair share of the finite valuable resources. In each of these cases, sorry, they're so cute. Sorry, I'm distracted. In each of these cases, the individual can gain something by acting selfishly. But if everyone in the group pursues self-interest, all of the group members will ultimately be worse off than if they cooperated with each other. The notion that the pursuit of self-interest can sometimes be self-destructive is the basis for what we call the social dilemma. It's a key term, highlight it. It's right down here. Says a situation in which a self-interested choice by everyone will create the worst outcome for everyone. In a social dilemma, what is good for one is bad for all. If everyone makes the most self-rewarding choice, everyone suffers the greatest loss. This section examines how people resolve the tension between their cooperative and competitive inclinations in social dilemmas. So the first dilemma that they talk about is called the prisoner's dilemma. We begin with a crime story. Oh, I love October. Two partners in crime are picked up by the police for questioning. Although the police believe they have committed a major offense, there's only enough evidence to convict them on a minor charge. In order to get a conviction for the more serious crime, the police will have to convince one of the criminals to testify against the other. I think I'm going to wait. Okay, so separated during questioning, the criminals weigh their alternatives. If neither confesses, both will get light sentences on the minor charge. But if both confess and plead guilty, then both will receive somewhat longer sentences. But if one confesses and the other stays silent, the confessing criminal will go free while the silent criminal will pay the maximum penalty. This situation forms the basis for the research paradigm known as the prisoner's dilemma. So this is also a key term. I would highlight it as well. It's a type of dilemma in which one party must make either a cooperative or a competitive move in relation to the other party. The dilemma is typically designed so that the competitive move appears to be in one's self-interest, but if both sides make this move, then both suffer more than if both had simply cooperated. In the two persons prisoner dilemma, participants are given a series of choices that give them the option of cooperating or competing with each other. But either option has potential costs. Imagine you're prisoner A in figure 8-9. I think this is one of those things where it's just easier to understand if you see it than explain it. So I'm not going to explain figure 8 and 9. You can look at it. It makes it real easy to understand. You should see that no matter what prisoner B does, you're better off if you compete with B and confess. But here's the dilemma. If you both confess, each of you gets 5 years. If neither of you confesses, each of you only gets 1. In other words, each individual is better off selling out their partner. But if both individuals do this, they're worse off than if neither did. It's really a perplexing situation. So what do you think you would do? This kind of social dilemma is not limited to situations involving only two individuals at a time. Imagine, for example, being in a burning building or on a sinking ship. Each individual might want to race for the exit or for the lifeboats as quickly as possible and push others out of the way. But if everyone does that, more people will die in the panic. More lives will be saved if everyone leaves in an orderly fashion. Soldiers engaged in combat may be better off individually if they take no chances and duck for cover, but if their comrades do the same thing, they will all certainly be slaughtered by the enemy. Nations face such dilemmas as well. Two countries locked in an arms race would be better off if they stopped spending money and resources on weapons of mass destruction. But neither country wants to risk falling behind the other. Ooh. They've given lots of examples. I think if you really want to write them down, I would, especially if this is something that you're struggling conceptually to grasp. But I think I've got a pretty good handle on it. So I think the general definition of it does me pretty well. I think if you're still struggling with it, there's some I think there's several things that you can pick out as good examples of this in here. All right, so there's a resource dilemma as well. There's a prisoner's dilemma and a resource dilemma. One particular category of social dilemmas that people face frequently and in vitally important contexts is called resource dilemmas, which concern how two or more people share a limited resource. That's a key term highlighted. As with prisoners' dilemmas, attempts to gain a personal advantage will backfire if the other party also makes the competitive choice. Resource dilemmas come in two basic types: common and public goods. In the commons dilemma, I'm going to highlight that term, commons dilemma. If people take as much as they want of a limited resource that does not replenish itself, nothing will be left for anyone. If you've ever read the fiction book City of Ember, this is pretty well exampled or illustrated in that fiction novel. Anyway, one popular example of this dilemma is known as the tragedy of the commons. In earlier times, people would let their animals graze on the town's lush, grassy commons. But if all the animals grazed to their heart's content and to their own owner's benefit, the commons would be completely stripped, and then the animal's food supply would be diminished, and the owner's welfare would be threatened. Today, the tragedy of the commons is a clear danger on a global scale. Deforestation, air pollution, carbon emission, ocean dumping, massive irrigation, overfishing, commercial development of wilderness areas, overpopulation, and overconsumption all pit individual self-interest against the common good. That's a highlight term, or sentence, sorry. The whole thing, deforestation all the way down. Yeah. So, to teach his students about the tragedy of the commons, social psychologist Dylan Selterman in 2019 gave his class a chance to earn extra credit points during their exam. Each student had to indicate whether they'd prefer 2 or 6 points of credit, extra credit. The catch, however, was that if more than 10% of the class chose 6 points, then no one would get any extra credit. The typical outcome when Seltzerman and others have presented this dilemma to the students is that more than 10% take the 6-point option, resulting in no one getting extra credit. It's simply too tempting for too many individuals to try to maximize their own points at a risk for the greater good. So they rather hurt themselves than not have the potential to gain more. That's a shame. I think that's going to be pretty important. So I'm going to mark that study. All right, so we've talked about commons dilemma, and now we're going to talk about public goods dilemma. All right, so we defined commons dilemma, and now they're going to define public goods dilemma. All the individuals are supposed to contribute resources to a common pool in the commons dilemma. Examples of these public goods include blood supply, public broadcasting, schools, libraries, roads, parks. But if no one gives, then the service can't continue. And then all suffer the loss. Again, self-interest conflicts with the public good. Yeah, that's pretty simple and straightforward. Okay, so now they're going to respond to social dilemmas. Social dilemmas pose serious threats to people's quality of life and even to life itself. How do people try to solve them? What factors make them more or less cooperative when faced with these dilemmas? Fear and greed are two critically important factors in determining reactions to these dilemmas. I think that's going to be critical. I would highlight that. The fear of being exploited by others and the greedy desire to maximize one's own outcomes. Yeah, that whole sentence, I would highlight that whole thing. Trust and communication, therefore, are two factors that can play critically important roles in promoting cooperation because they can reduce the fear of being exploited. So trust and communicate, yeah, I would highlight that as well. A strong sense of belonging and identity in a greater group also promotes cooperation, in part because this perspective can reduce fear and greed. Okay, so I would, instead of highlighting the whole sentence, I would highlight trust and communication, and then a strong sense of belonging and identity. Yeah. Those, yeah. Each of those two play roles in minimizing fear and greed. Yeah, that's what I would put in my notes. One interesting finding is that when research participants receive a dose of oxytocin, a neurochemical that can increase people's feeling of bonding with another person, they cooperate more with members of their group. Yeah, that's also kind of the plot of Animal Farm, but whatever. Or not Animal Farm. Which one is it where they just do drugs all the time? It might be Animal Farm. No. Maybe. I'll think of it in a minute. So Caitlin Woolley and Ayelet Fishbach in 2019 demonstrated a clever way to help establish a norm of cooperation: sharing food. Pairs of strangers in one study played a version of the prisoner's dilemma game. Before playing the game, the participants received goldfish crackers to eat, supposedly because the researchers were interested in how hunger affects people's decisions. In the shared bag condition, the pairs of strangers shared a Ziploc bag to eat the crackers from. In a separate bag condition, each member of the pair received their own separate baggie. The participants in the shared bag condition were more likely to cooperate with each other in the social dilemma than were the participants in the separate bag condition. And in another study, pairs of participants engaged in a negotiation activity in which they tried to reach a settlement for a workers' strike. If the pair had shared a bowl of chips and salsa before the negotiation, their negotiation went better. That is, they reached an agreement more quickly than if they ate from their own separate bowls. Cultural. Yeah, I think I would make a note of these studies by Woolley and Fishbach. I think it's going to become important. They're pretty critical. So cultural and individual differences also play a role. Some research has found that collectivists tend to cooperate more when dealing with friends or in-group members, but they compete more aggressively when they're dealing with strangers or out-group members. And individualist behavior does not very much as much as a function of who the other party is. They stay pretty consistent. Collectivists may be especially vigilant for fellow in-group members' violations of their group's cooperative norms. Individuals' social value orientation also matters. And people with a pro-social cooperative orientation seek to maximize joint gains or achieve equal outcomes. Those with individualist orientations seek to maximize their own gain, and people with competitive orientations seek to maximize their own gain relative to that of others. Oh my gosh, that's a hefty paragraph. Oh, I don't know why I read it. This table 8.3 has all of that written out and in an easy to read kind of way. I would, instead of highlight that whole freaking paragraph, I would just copy paste this table from his notes into your notes and study it. So these are just a few of the variables that can help determine competition or cooperation in social dilemmas. Take a look at the factors listed in this table. Each of these has been shown to facilitate the best solutions for social dilemmas. Yeah, I have a feeling this is going to be critical. Look at this table, guys. I forgot to make a note of it myself. Okay, so groups tend to be more competitive than individuals in mixed motive situations. One reason for this is that it can be harder to establish trust between groups than between individuals. Another reason is that members of a group feel they are more anonymous if they act alone, freeing them to act in a self-interested or even aggressive manner. Unfortunately, social dilemmas often do involve very large groups, like a city or a state or a nation, the whole world. In these circumstances, the structural arrangements listed toward the bottom of the table may be the most appropriate for trying to reduce exploitation. And let's be real, I think we can all understand that, you can be in a group and vastly disagree with what the group is going for and see how they're making things more difficult in negotiations simply because they've got this mindset of us versus them. Yeah, I think that could be really challenging. Sorry. Anyway, the next section is negotiation. So social dilemmas are but one type of conflict between individuals or groups that often must be resolved through a negotiation. I'm gonna highlight that sentence. Yeah. Successful negotiation can reduce many conflicts, but it is important to ask this question. What is a successful negotiation? Yeah, that's a good question. You might think it's a 50-50 compromise that is an ideal outcome for two negotiating parties. Here, the negotiators start at extreme positions and gradually work toward a mutually acceptable midpoint. But in many situations, however, both sides can do better than this. The reason for this is that most negotiations are not simply fixed sum situations in which each side can gain something only if the other side loses it. Instead, both sides often have the opportunity to reach an integrative agreement in which both parties obtain outcomes that are superior to just a 50-50 split. So I would highlight it. This is a key term. Yeah. A good way to understand this is to consider the tale of the two sisters and the orange. One sister wanted the juice to drink. The other wanted the peel for a cake. So they sliced the orange in half and each one took her portion. These sisters suffered from an advanced case of known as the fixed pie syndrome, the belief that whatever one of them won, the other one lost. But in fact, however, each of them could have had the whole thing, all of the juice for one and all of the peel for the other. An integrative agreement was well within their grasp, but they failed to see it. Unfortunately, research indicates that this happens all too often. Negotiators frequently agree to settlements that are worse for both sides. So I would highlight that definition of fixed pie syndrome, and an interactive agreement was well within their grasp, but they failed to see it. It is often difficult for participants in a dispute to listen carefully to each other and to consider each other's perspective. But communication in which both sides disclose their goals and their needs is critically important in allowing each side to see opportunities for joint benefits. I'm only going to say this because I think I'm one of the minority in this class, but I am married. I have been married for 12 years. And if there's anything I've learned, it's that this idea that if you just find the right person, you'll never fight in a relationship is absolutely ludicrous. Even if you love someone so much and you don't ever want to live without them, you're still going to fight about things because you live with another person. It's hard. It's hard to sometimes give up just having everything your way. And if that's what you want, singlehood is really nice. And not going to lie, I would totally do it if I couldn't absolutely live without my husband. But if you want to live with a partner, you need to learn how to do this integrative agreement. Not all of it can be that way, obviously, every single time. But if you can learn to actually listen to your partner and listen to what they actually need and try to communicate in a way where you can get to the heart of what they're after and be able to communicate what you're after in a relationship, oftentimes you can find this perfect sweet spot in between where you both get 100% of what you need. And the worst thing that can happen from it is that you listen to each other really well. Okay, I'm going to get off my soapbox now. So, while this may seem obvious, people in negotiations, just like the two sisters with the orange, very often fail to communicate their goals and needs. They may hold back information because of lack of trust in the other side, or because they think their goals are more clear to the other party than they actually are. If communication is improved, however, the outcomes can improve dramatically. I'm going to highlight that too. Outcomes often improve also in response to a number of other factors, such as training in conflict resolution techniques, or using computerized negotiation support systems and related technologies by establishing trust, or getting the parties to take a less egocentric perspective, or to think about higher order motives than just their preferred outcomes. Yeah, I think that's going to be critical too. I would highlight that as well. Sometimes very small gestures can make a real difference. A series of studies by Juliana Schroeder and others in 2019 found that a simple handshake between the parties at the outset of the negotiation, which the researchers proposed signals cooperative intent, significantly improved joint outcomes. As another example of a small gesture making a difference, recall the study we described a bit earlier about pairs of participants negotiating after eating some food. The participants negotiated much more successfully if they had shared food from the same bowl than if they had eaten food from separate bowls. Yeah, I think that can make a yeah. One more example from married life, sorry. Sometimes my husband just wants to know that I'm not against him, that it's not a me versus him. And oftentimes, a subtle move in the way that we are addressing each other or discussing a problem can make a huge difference. Instead of sitting across from him at a table, like, in chess or something, where you're sitting across from your opponent, I sit next to him. Or if he feels like he's being attacked, I will touch him or hug him or show him in a demonstrative way physically that, like by holding his hand, that I'm not just out for myself. I'm not attacking him. I'm not after him. And oftentimes that's enough to just cut the tension, and it helps with that negotiation process. Sorry, I will stop. Sorry. So, culture and negotiation. As the world becomes smaller, as the world becomes smaller because of advances in technology, the globalization of business and the economy, and global threats concerning the environment and terrorism, the ability to negotiate effectively across cultures becomes increasingly important. Understanding cultural differences relevant to negotiation is therefore vital. Table 8.4 lists some common assumptions that are made by negotiators from Western individualistic cultures that are not always shared by representatives of other cultures. Yep. So consider, for example, our statement that good communication is a key ingredient in successful negotiation. Communication across cultures can present special challenges, whereas an individualistic perspective emphasizes direct communication and confrontation. A collectivist perspective emphasizes more indirect communication and a desire to avoid direct conflict, whereas individualistic negotiators may emphasize rationality. Collectivist negotiators have a greater tolerance for contradiction and emotionality. I think both of those 2 points are going to become key on a quiz or even a test. I would highlight them. So the desire to be confrontational versus indirect, and the desire to be rational versus contradictory or even emotional. Although collectivists prefer emotionality that is not confrontational. Negotiators from individualistic cultures are more likely to respond with a direct no to a proposal than are collectivists. And negotiators from collectivist cultures are more likely to refer to social rules and relationships than individuals. I would also make a note of those two things as well. So according to Yongxia Zhu, I know I'm saying it wrong, I'm sorry, Bernard McKenna and others in 2007, relationship building is an important part of the negotiation process among Chinese. Negotiators from individualistic cultures may need to be uncharacteristically patient with processes that may seem irrelevant to the task at hand because they are important in creating guangqi. The Chinese term, I know I'm butchering it, I'm sorry guys, a Chinese term for relationship. The initial sessions in negotiations with Chinese take a particular importance because they can set the tone for establishing guangqi. While negotiators from collectivist cultures are more concerned with preserving relationships, negotiators from individualistic cultures are more concerned with closing the deal as efficiently as possible. I would make a note of that last sentence. Another factor concerns saving face, which is feeling that others continue to respect you and that you have maintained honor. I would highlight that as well. Although saving face in a negotiation is important across cultures, it may be a more central importance in particular cultures. For example, illustrate the contrasting values of rationality and honor across cultures with culture-specific quotations. Separate the people from the problem is advice given to negotiators in the West. And it emphasizes being objective and rational, whereas an Arabic proverb says, I'd rather you respect me than feed me, or dignity before bread. It reflects the role of maximizing honor rather than profit in cultures, such as in Egypt. To study this cultural difference, Gelfand and her colleagues had participants in the United States and in Egypt engage in an hour-long negotiation. The researchers transcribed the audio from these negotiations and measured the frequency of words that emphasized a distinctively Western form of logical reasoning, such as rational, logic, deduce, cause, solution, as well as words concerning honor, such as honest, reputable, appear, forbid. The results revealed the expected cultural difference, not only in how frequently these types of words were used, but also in the relationship between using these expressions and the success of a negotiation. The more that words reflecting a rational model were used, the better the negotiation outcomes were in the United States, but worse in the outcomes were in Egypt. And on the other hand, the more the words reflected honor were used, the better the negotiation outcomes were in Egypt. But there was no relationship between use of honor words and negotiation in the United States. So we like it, sure, but it doesn't make a difference. Emotional responses may hurt negotiations between members of different cultures. You know what? I'm not going to highlight the whole thing, but I am going to make a note of this study because I do think it's going to become important. And I didn't say anything about the Yongxia Zhu and McKenna study. I feel so bad for butchering it, but yeah, I would make a note of that one too. So, emotional responses. They may hurt negotiations between members of different cultures if they are deemed inappropriate in one of the cultures. Expressions of pride are more likely to be received positively in individualistic cultures, whereas expressions of shame are more likely to be received positively in collectivist cultures. Shirley Koppelman and Ashley Shelby Rosette in 2008 conducted an experiment that illustrates cultural differences in sensitivity to particular emotions. Business students from Hong Kong and Israel participated in a negotiation exercise in which an American female business manager offered to them a take it or leave it proposal video. For half the students, the manager made the offer displaying positive emotion. She spoke in a friendly tone. She smiled. She nodded often and appeared cordial. For the other half, the manager displayed negative emotions. She spoke in an angry tone and appeared intimidating and irrational. Oh, sorry, not irrational, irritated. I read it too fast. As the researchers have predicted, the students from Hong Kong responded very differently as a function of the emotion displayed. As can be seen in Figure A12, they were much more likely to accept an offer that was made with a display of positive than negative emotions. Students from Israel were direct and confrontational. Students from Israel, where direct and confrontational negotiations are more common, and perhaps where an American woman would be seen as less of an outgroup, were relatively unaffected by the emotional display of the negotiator when deciding whether or not to accept the offer. Understanding these kinds of cultural differences is essential for ensuring the best resolution of conflicts and negotiations. I think I'm going to make a note of this study as well, just in case. And I'm going to highlight that first sentence. Understanding these kinds of cultural differences is essential. Fortunately, education about these issues help. Sujin Lee and others in 2013 had participants from East Asian and North American cultures negotiate with each other. Some of the participants learned information about the kinds of cross-cultural differences discussed in this section of the textbook and were encouraged to think about the other culture's perspective during the negotiation. Other participants did not receive this cultural information and were instead encouraged to think about the other person's alternatives in the negotiation. The participants who received the cross-cultural perspective-taking procedure achieved much better negotiation outcomes than did the other participants. Yeah, I'm going to make a note of that study as well. Wendy Adair and Janine, it's either Jean? Yeah, Wendy Adair and Jean Brett in 2005 describe a negotiation as a kind of dance. The partners move with each other according to various rhythms, and the dance will only work if they can synchronize their movements and work together. Negotiations across cultures can be challenging because the participants have different ways of performing these dances. As Adair and Brett put it, just as it will take time for a Cuban who is accustomed to rapid staircase movements of Latin social dancing and an American who's accustomed to smooth walking dances like the waltz to get into sync, it will also take time for cross-cultural negotiators to synchronize their movements. It is in the best interest of negotiation. It is in the best interest of negotiators, therefore, to learn each other's perspectives so that they can work together and more effectively and fluently without stepping on each other's toes. I like that, how they ended that. I think this will only work if they can synchronize their movements and work together is probably the most important line in that whole paragraph. Yeah. Okay, and we're done with 8. Yay! It took me a little bit longer than I thought, which does not give me much hope for the next chapter because that was only 35 pages and we now have 55 pages to go. But that's tomorrow's problem. We'll figure it out. Okay, thanks for coming, guys. Talk to you later.